Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hey, have you read this book? Have you ever wondered what would happen if all humans on Earth suddenly ceased to exist? Well, this is exactly what Alan Weisman sets out to explore in his book, The World Without Us. You may think that humans becoming extinct would be impossible, but it could happen. After all, other species are becoming extinct all the time. Maybe the cause will be a nuclear or biological war, a huge industrial accident releasing deadly pollutants, or even some new highly infectious disease destroying all human life. Consider what would happen to New York subway if people were to disappear. Without the constant work of the subway crew and hundreds of pumps to get rid of the underground water, the subway would take only 2 days to be completely flooded, even with no rain. Above ground, without maintenance, it wouldn't take long for the streets to crack and break up. Leaves will collect in the gutter, and with no one to clear them away, weeds will grow in the decaying leaves and in the cracks in the road. With no one to put out fires, lightning could start a fire and it would quickly spread through the streets. With no one to repair buildings, water would seep in cracks and mold and fungi would break down wood. Ants, roaches, termites and other insects will start their colonies in houses. Soon, mice, birds and other animals would make their nests inside buildings, which will start to collapse as they become overgrown with vines. Tanks holding petroleum and chemicals will corrode and the contents will spill out. Gradually, bacteria will feed on the chemicals and break them down. However, many synthetic chemicals like pesticides may take thousands of years to be processed into less toxic compounds. You may be thinking, why would everyone just suddenly disappear, leaving their homes and belongings for nature to reclaim? Well, this is just what happened in Varosha, a resort town for tourists where 20,000 people lived. Varosha on the island of Cyprus became off-limits in 1974 after a war broke out between the Greeks and Turks. When fighting escalated, the UN peacekeeping force kept both sides out. Houses have now disappeared under bougainvillea and trees are growing straight out of roofs, which have collapsed. Decay to buildings is so advanced that nothing is salvageable, and nature continues its restoration. Another location where people are banned from is the DMZ, or the Demilitarized Zone, between North and South Korea. The DMZ is 151 miles long and 2.5 miles wide. This has become a refuge for wildlife which would otherwise have disappeared. There are rare species of snow geese, red-crowned cranes and white-naped cranes. The Asiatic black bear, Eurasian lynx, musk deer, Chinese water deer, yellow-throated marten and Amur leopard can live undisturbed in rice paddies which have reverted back to wetlands. Another area which has been abandoned by people is a zone of alienation, an 18-mile radius around the Chernobyl nuclear plant which exploded in 1986. The radiation release was up to 300 times the radiation released from the bombing of Hiroshima in 1945. A concrete shell was hastily built to prevent more radiation escaping. By 1990, animals such as deer, boars, moose, lynx and wolves have returned to the surviving forests. Much of what is man-made will break down over time, but something which will take much longer to disintegrate is plastic. Except for the small amount of plastic which has been incinerated, all the plastic ever made is still somewhere in the environment, and if it is in the ocean, it will take even longer to degrade. All this plastic has appeared in the last 50 years or so. It is estimated that 80% of the plastic in the ocean had originally been discarded on land. It had blown off garbage trucks and landfills and washed down storm drains, down rivers, and found its way to the growing 250 billion pound plastic island in the Pacific. Among this ocean plastic, are noodles, which are little pellets of plastic, the raw materials which is used to make consumer goods. The chances of everyone on Earth all dying in an epidemic is remote but possible. In Africa, Ebola quickly spread and killed many people, but if the Ebola virus were to mutate, it could become even more deadly. Now let's look at what happened to the Mayans. For at least 1,600 years, about 6 million Maya lived across a tropical rainforest in what today is northern Guatemala, Belize, and Mexico. Beginning in the 8th century AD, the Mayan civilization vanished and vegetation covered the plazas and pyramids. Was it famine, drought, or epidemics which killed the Mayans? Going by the evidence left behind, archaeologists believe it was most likely that the Mayan society had evolved to have too many nobles who all lusted after wealth and power. As the rulers tried to gain more power, people had to build fortress walls around their cities to defend themselves. Manpower was devoted to fighting instead of food production. Growing food could only be carried out within the city walls. This resulted in ecological disaster and famine. So, what can we learn from this? If we all disappeared, what would happen to all the domestic animals raised to feed people? And what about all the food crops, carefully selected and bred to produce maximum yields, irrigated, fertilized with chemicals and sprayed with herbicides and insecticides? These are just some of the questions which Weisman discusses in this fascinating book. The vision of a world without us is alluring, but it is a paradox that if it was to happen, we wouldn't be here to see it. The lesson we can all learn from this book is that we must stop destroying the environment and ourselves by the craving of more and more material things. Perhaps we can set aside more reserves for wildlife, find a more natural alternative to plastic, and live a simpler life in tune with nature. Thanks for watching.